Thanks very much, and I'll just run through the highlights. Happy to take any questions. So this is a quarterly report. So we touch on the quarterly position as the trust board reports information. And so during Q1 we had 20 serious incidents reported to the trust by staff, and of which 9 occurred in the month of June. And there's no indicators of special cause variation on this period of reporting. And just to note, the board will see I have included SPC charts for more information, just to give you a better view of kind of the trends and themes. Duty of candour is applied to all of these incidents. At the time of writing the report, there were 37 live serious incidents in the review process, of which 5 exceeded the 60-day review standard that I've talked to you about previously. So we're working hard to bring that down to 0. And on that note, I guess I'll say at that point that the board will have been cited that we had previously asked NHSE for some additional resource for the team to help with the backlog of SI reviews. I'm really pleased to report to the board that that has been approved at the end of last week. I would like to thank my executive colleagues because initially at the beginning of the week, NHSE had not approved the business case. And I believe my colleagues had some conversations which have now enabled us, it's been approved. So we hope to be interviewing next week and have that supported really quickly. So in regards to the slightly delayed SIs, I would hope to be able to give you a timeline at next board around when we get to that 0 target of reviews over 60 days. And in terms of completed reviews, 13 reports were submitted for consideration for closure during that quarter. I have just touched around the themes from these serious incidents, which include family engagement and support, the importance of strengthening communication and interface with external partners, including CGL and GPs, and better communication between our different services within our own trust. And medication management did come up, which is not usual, but it did come up as themes over the last quarter. I've reported to the board regularly that the highest number of deaths reported over this period are around unknown cause and relate to death or service users in the community, with most deaths occurring in our dementia and frailty services. The paper also gives an overview of our current actions and progress against our external reviews undertaken by Niche and on the new psychological approaches review. I also just wanted to cite the board on a new report that's been commissioned by NHSE into the care and treatment of a young person who, whilst on leave from one of our secure units, committed a homicide. And I hope to be able to bring you more information on that at the next meeting. During Q1, there's been a total of 7 inquests held, 2 of which occurred in July, I should say, apologies. 6 of these reached a conclusion of suicide and the other a narrative conclusion, and no issues were highlighted during our inquests in June. However, in July, we had 2 inquests that did result in PFDs being issued to the trust. So broadly, PFD 1, the areas of highlighted concern pertain to lack of beds and AMPS provision, communication interface between teams and organisations, and management and delays in the prescription of carbamazepine. And that's a multi-agency PFD. PFD 2, broadly the areas of highlighted concern relate to clozapine monitoring and management, and including clinical understanding and interpretation of blood results. And we have had a previous PFD in relation to this, which was referenced by the coroner. Just to note that we have had the initial stakeholder meetings for both of these PFDs and are in progress from a response perspective. We have second meetings with stakeholders at the end of this month to look at the final response and any actions that have come out of that. The PFDs have also resulted in a Section 464 response from the CQC with a number of areas of assurance and documentations requested from them in regards to the PFD. And responses for this have been collated within the timeframes requested with executive sign-off undertaken. Moving on from it, following, I've talked to you a couple of times around the SI overdue actions. We are starting to get some traction on this, and we have seen a reduction of 12 SI actions from prior reporting. I've just detailed there the number of incidents reported throughout the quarter and the key themes from those quarters. In addition, the local clinical governance facilitator has been working with our divisional colleagues around the backlog of historic incidents that I reported to you some months ago in regard to 2021 and 2022. I am pleased to report there is noted improved performance across both of these years, with a reduction of 25% of open incidents in 2021 and a reduction of 62% in open incidents from 2022, which is really gratifying to see. And I would hope to be reporting to the board that these incidents are all closed in the next 8 weeks, allowing us to look forward and not backwards. Then detail various aspects of specific data within the report. And just to note on that a new RRP dashboard has almost been completed with intended completion in September, and what that will enable us to do is give us a robust triangulation of data in a more comprehensive understanding of the patterns and themes leading to restrictive interventions to our service users, and supporting and strengthening current and new work streams and to help to bring down the number of interventions where clinically reasonable. Similarly, as we've touched on a number of times, the paper details staff assaults, which has shown variation, but continuing to rise above the mean, with astronomical reporting noted in May. And then have touched again there on Operation Stoneway, which is in place to support the reduction in staff assaults. In regard to patients' assaults, we can see that the total number of reported assaults on service users for the quarter has shown a month-on-month increase, with a total of 174 incidents being reported, of which 66 occurred in June. Just to note to the board that the majority of these incidents occurred in our PQ services, with a number of incidents related to the same service user as the instigator. Just to move through to our PALS and complaints data, we can see that the number of PALS cases has increased since the beginning of the year. The number of open formal complaints has increased from 40. As a quarterly position, the customer relations teams received 28 formal complaints in quarter one, which is an increase in 13 received in quarter four. We can see that there are 25 formal complaints on the investigation table. And this means that currently that 60% of those complaints are awaiting an IO, an investigation officer, which unfortunately is an increase in prior month. However, hot off the press, I would like to note to the board that the latest results indicate that we are at 49% of complaints rating early response, following an increase in support to the team and from a secondment and from a very experienced bank member. So the figures are improving significantly since the report was written. And I've also included for your review a themed review of complaints for quarter one. And we can see that the top categories for complaints include failure to provide adequate care, communication with patients, and disputes over diagnosis. And just to note that these categories have varied from the prior quarter that I presented previously. We have provided for the board a breakdown by protected characteristics, and I've given a summary there which I won't go through in detail because I recognise time constraints, but we have accumulated some of the data there that the initial review is telling us. I think it's important to state that obviously, we've only been collating 2 quarters worth of this type of data. So we're evolving and learning with this data, and we will get more and more from it as the report goes forward. I have just summarised a safeguarding position in that we have seen some drift and delay in relation to actions and learning to take to child safeguarding practice reviews, specifically 3 from Birmingham. This has been appropriately escalated within the trust with actions being taken. And the head of safeguarding has worked with Birmingham LSCP, triangulating all the outstanding actions to ensure they're fully cited on the outstanding areas. We are working extremely closely now with safeguarding to ensure that both patient safety and safeguarding reviews are closely aligned, closely interconnected, and all of them fed into PSAG. And it is really starting to reap the benefits in our understanding of some of the patient safety challenges we have across the organisation. And that's the summary concluded. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Any questions?
Yeah. Me first try. It's just in terms of the data around ethnicity, age, etc.
Yes.
It's really helpful, and I can see it's evolving. But I think, can you think of as part of the evolution, for want of a phrase, that it's more of a rate than an absolute number? Because we know, don't we, that in terms of our population, it's slightly skewed in certain ways, in a variety of ways.
Yes.
And I think it would be helpful to know whether everyone is, I suppose, access to complaint processes is an odd way of describing it, but in that sense that we're getting, it's balanced in terms of what the source of the complaints is, if you seem to me.
Yes,
demographic group. I think that would be quite helpful, because at the moment it would suggest on the face of it that there's a more access to that process than for others, and I think it would just be helpful to get that as a kind of more of a better comparison. Really, thank you.
Thank you, Graham.
Excuse me. A couple of points on this. The first one is around the increase in patient assaults and staff assaults. There's a reference to Operation Stone Weight.
Yes.
I'd be interested to know a little bit more about that, and also whether or not it's actually having an impact.
Yeah.
If there's an underlying trend of incidents going up. And then around complaints, the increase in complaints and the increase in unexpected deaths, what assurances are we giving the friends and families of our patients in terms of how thoroughly these will be investigated, so that they've got some kind of assurance that something is happening about their loved ones?
The unexpected deaths is quite complex in nature, in that we have as I've kind of referred to in the paper, we have a cohort of elderly and frail patients. So whilst we have an unexpected death reported in the community, in a high number of cases this is related to natural causes, so patients who pass away through their comorbidities. So there's not a natural link to that. However, we do have a number of processes in place to give assurance to families, primarily through the duty of candour process, where if we, when we've reviewed an incident, if we feel that it needs further investigation, they're included in that investigation. Their questions and the questions they have is answered. And that is shared with them either in a face-to-face meeting or through a copy of the report. But we also have our learning from deaths process, which if incidents don't meet kind of the need to have a serious incident review, we will learn through a different process. And again, that can be shared with the family, so that there's a sense that these deaths are considered and are looked into, and we are learning from them.
And there's so the other one was around assaults, but could you just touch on complaints as well then? There's an increased number of complaints. So if that was me, as somebody who's raised a complaint and it's many months, it's I've not been communicated to. I get the impression that we don't care. So what mechanisms are going back to those individuals to reassure them that something is going to be done and their complaint is going to be looked into. And then my other question was around the increase in patient assaults and staff assaults.
Yeah, so in relation to complaints, you're absolutely right. We have noted that increase in complaints. One of the things that I'll be reporting in my next report, and something that we're looking at, is what is the conversion from the PALS contacts to formal complaints, and that's really important because it tells us, you know, when that initial concern is raised, how well are we dealing with that at source to prevent it from turning into a formal complaint, which we acknowledge there are some delays in being able to investigate and offer. So we will be doing a fixed piece of work around the PALS team, understanding that conversion and how well we can manage those initial concerns at that level. Trying to think through your questions.
I think the question is, we're in good
contact, yeah.
we know that we're taking our time.
We make regular contact with complainants to keep them updated, yes. Sorry, thank you. In relation to Operation Stonethwaite, I think I need to go away and have a look at some more information. Not sure what updates I can provide today to you on that, but I can certainly go away and find that information for you.
I'm happy to bring that offline. I just wanted to know how the insurance, so it is making an impact.
I can take a brief. It's happening in the West Midlands for a period of a few years. It's a collaboration between the police and mental health trusts, and it's really, if there are assaults, you know, it was initially started with inpatients, but it's now being extended to community. Then the police support and help us, and the patient gets the right pathway, whether it's down the care route or the criminal justice route, and that's actually helped statistically reduce some of the in certain areas, but it's to collaborative, we meet regularly and that carries on. And the clinical governance committee meetings talk about these assaults in a lot of detail because, you know, that's something that we focus on a lot. We've got the SPC starts, we've talked about QI today. So it's something that we are looking at quite seriously. And just coming back to the complaints, that's the other thing that we feed back to the team so that we get these things and improve on those.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to pick up on the point about preventing future deaths pieces, that because I think there is a very, you know, this is the first time I think we had a preventing future deaths piece that talks about us not learning.
Yes.
And I think that's quite significant.
Yes.
And so I'm just wondering about how key payers are going to look through that. I know we've had some thematic reviews around all of the PFGs and learning. I know that people also identified that actually some of the actions still outstanding around SIs, and we now got that additional tools. It would really help us to understand, was that one of those outstanding actions, or indeed was this one that we felt was had been taken on board already, but actually the implementation and embedding is our issue. I just think it would be helpful for us to.
Yeah, and if I may, Roisin, and so we had the stakeholder meeting yesterday to review the response regarding the COSAPine, which is the PFD that relates to its concerns that we haven't learned from our previous PFD. Now, respectively, what we found is that actually the systems and processes that we put into place as a trust following the first PFD were extremely sound and extremely robust. However, and you mentioned there really well the embedding, what we found in this case was that it was the human element that failed. So the processes are in place, they're very distinct around escalation of monitoring and action. And they put a lot of work into that initially following the last PFD. But the learning and understanding the human element was not there. And so actually our response to this PFD is very much focused on that element.
I mean, I was going to raise the same point actually, Sheena, around, I just wonder whether in the way that you've articulated, we could articulate it in the framework of the new patient safety framework. And if this was to come to us now as a first time, how would we do this differently looking back? So taking a more sort of positive, proactive approach. We take this time, this is how we're going to embed this, and clearly the training and learning is massive, isn't it? And that's the whole sort of core of that framework. So I just wondered, it's almost like, yes, it's happened before, but we're now taking this is our new framework, and this is how we will do it in a positive learning perspective.
Absolutely, and I think it is a balanced response to the coroner, because we have got really sound systems in place. I think it's just recognising that specific element that we need to focus on, and we did look at this more widely, didn't we? From a ESA perspective, in that we did a safety summit on orthopedic, and we didn't just look at this, we looked at everything that had gone before, which you led that safety summit. So there's a lot of work that's going on around this, that will help improve this. But we've been able to be quite focused as an immediate priority of what the immediate learning is, and that is around the community evidence and our teams.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering if we could probably consider incorporating the human factor approach to the way we do incident investigation and the learning from them as well. Some other organizations focus a lot on human factor,
Yeah.
which is what I really picked up, and they adopt it as an approach in terms of delivering the training around the learning and getting that embedded within the system as well. So it's something that we really take forward as a specific approach, alongside mapping that with a QI project as well, which may help us mitigate some of the things that have really happened. The other element is also looking at the actions that have been implemented from prevention of future deaths in the past, and asking the question whether they're properly implemented.
Yeah.
If so, if they were not translated into improvement, tangible gains, then can we revisit them and see what learning we can take forward?
Yeah, and that's the piece of work that I'm undertaking currently, is that back review actually of PFDs over the last 2 years. I'll be able to provide some understanding of how well we have learned and actions we've put into place. And as you know, Rashid, now we have really robust mechanisms in place around PFDs and the learning and the monitoring of closure of actions around those.
I definitely concur with the point that you mentioned, David, around the human factor.
Yeah.
The QI project, we did that in Warsaw, and it was so effective. It's very effective. So it makes sense for us to consider taking it.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's vitally important in relation to this PFDs. Are there any other questions for Lisa? No. Yes. Lisa, thank you.
Very much.
Moving on, the agenda, it's the report, which is
Thanks very much. Yeah. So obviously you've had the papers, which I'll take as read, but just to draw out some of the kind of red or significant areas. We've had 2 meetings, and some of the key issues that come out. We've started having staff colleagues or colleagues coming to the meeting, and network representatives as well. And one of our first was a very interesting conversation about the use of language in the organisation, particularly in relation to particular religious groups, and actually the formal use of it through training. It was a quite an eye-opening conversation, to be honest, for me. But actually has made me think more about the language that we use all the time. Our conscious, are not sort of, following national guidance all the time if it's not the right set of guidance. But it was specifically around some Islamic issues, particularly, and actually there was a very effective conversation about action we'd taken to improve our work in that area. So, but I think it just reminded us all that we need to think about the things we do all the time, because it's quite easy to offend people by just using what are kind of colloquial references to things, without any harm meant, nevertheless. delivering some. There were some specific issues around recruitment timelines, and these have been picked up from attendance from NEDs at induction, particularly where new recruits have been talking to us about how long it had taken to be recruited, and then how long it took to actually get onto a ward to do any work. So actually, we agreed that we needed to look definitely at those timelines and that whole process, including now potentially the process before that, of developing the vacancy, is reviewed, and one of the subcommittees is looking at that now. Without wanting to do a spoiler, clearly there are issues about finance at the moment, particularly within the organisation, and particularly in relation to the cost of the current spend around temporary workforce. And we had an effective conversation to talk about how we need to be more integrated as committees in relation to the impacts of any recovery plans that we need to put in place to make sure that we're balancing it with continuing to move forward in relation to recruitment and the process and the potential expense around that to do the right thing, but also the quality and safety. So it was quite an important conversation to make sure that when we start that work, which will probably be, and certainly will be getting guidance, I'll use that phrase, from NHSE about what sorts of control, certainly from the ICB, what kind of controls we should put in place. We need to be making sure we draw that conversation right through all the committees. And finally, we had a conversation about the BAF in that first meeting, and we agreed that we would look to separate the issues around equality within the organisation and the issues about colleague engagement. Can really think those things separately, because actually they've been lumped together, and in a way our approach to those two things is quite different actually. So we agreed that we would do that, so that's taking that forward. Just because we referred to it earlier in terms of health and wellbeing, we did receive a detailed report from Mandy Fletcher, who's leading on that at the moment. And Mandy's been doing a lot of work and developing a lot of offers, to the workforce, but the uptake is not in the place where we want it to be, and we really felt that there was some work to be done there. Mandy felt that particularly, but there are potentially kind of resource issues associated with that. So really give it the focus to really make sure that we can develop those aspects, and we anticipate at some point that that's likely to come through some decision to exec, obviously, in relation to some of those issues. But we were encouraging to put those proposals forward, because really it's such a key part to our way forward and our values of supporting our colleagues. In terms of the second meeting, we did want to specifically, whilst thanking our medical workforce colleagues and all of our colleagues in the workforce in terms of supporting those who wish to take industrial action to do so and keep our service users safe. We are starting to become concerned that as the industrial action proceeds, people will become tired, people will have issues. We will be less able to do that as effectively as we have to date, and there was certainly some concern around that in terms of growing impact for our services, and we felt it was important to say publicly, we would urge both sides to try and resolve the issue as quickly as possible, because in the end it will start, or potentially will start to impact. In terms of the final issue was we did receive a regular report that we do on the residents. I forget what residents is for. I forget.
I
I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's where we receive information about equality and diversity through our system. And unfortunately, we haven't seen the improvement that we'd hoped we would see. In fact, it was quite disappointing, and so additional recommendations have been made to continue to roll out some of the work that we're doing there, but to make sure that it's a proper equality and diversity issue. It's about broadening across the whole workforce, not targeted workforce necessarily, but everyone. And we list some of the recommendations there, which we supported, and I think that's quite important. The other thing to say, at this last meeting, we received a number of reports that were standard updates from the medical workforce, from psychological professions, and indeed from the Workforce Directorate. And this, and I will say it publicly in the board, this month's reports were full of assurance. It was a positive set of reports that we received. They were good quality, and we came through feeling more assured, in fact, than the people that recommended to us. Their confidence clearly needed to be encouraged through that process. But I think it's really important. So there's great work going on in the medical directorate around appraisals, and it's consistent. It's been consistent now, and all the time I've been the chair of this committee. It is consistent. There's no dropping the ball in that area at all. So that's to be congratulated. And Giles wasn't there, but if you could pass that on, I'd be very grateful. And some of this amazing work, the psychological therapies lead is doing to support additional posts in our system, and indeed in the region and outside of the system, both to be very commended really by the board, I think, full of assurance, and really giving you hope for the opportunities that can be put into other places potentially to impact on the workforce. I think with that, I'll open to questions. I don't know, Patrick, if you want to add anything extra.
So no, quite happy to take questions.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add on about the post feedback from the staff member, that there has been some communication between our EDI team and the department that organizes this training, which is external. And there's been also been conversations with other people, because it's not we help you. There's multiple people who have to speak outside of trust, and we're thinking of some joint conversations, whether we can do that collaboration.
Yeah, I think it's great that we can influence other people to change their language. But we can hold ourselves to account. I think it's probably that's the way I would say, and so that's great news. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Any other questions for
Thanks. Just around the risks associated with the recruitment overall, there might be a variation across the various divisional work plans for recruitment. The overall ratings on the bar, if we have financial challenges, I wonder what is within the quick win of the organization to mitigate that, or
If I was honest, I wouldn't be the person who would know that necessarily, except to say we've got issues about access to certain training, which we've talked about a number of times, which is restricted because of resourcing, and we need to think about what, balancing access to that training and the workforce on the staff and on the board. What's the balance there? Is it worth putting the extra cost in to get people on the board? It's not my decision. That's an operational decision that needs to be made. But I think also it seemed that the process, some of the feedback was about how the system seemed to work quite slowly to get people through the system. At what specific points, I don't know, which is why the kind of key piece of the review needs to be done. But clearly people were talking about 4 to 6 months to be appointed for bank roles, which are relatively straightforward. So, it's that kind of approach, really. Sorry, Patrick.
Yeah, so I think it's really being able to describe what the actual issue is, because I think there's a risk that we can talk about a specific cohort, but kind of give that as that's the recruitment process for.
I'm having trouble with it now.
So we do track our recruitment process and report on a quarterly basis to committee. So I think on the last report, we expect to recruit people within 35 days, in currently running it to 85 days. There's a number of different things that we put in place in doing that, because they will come in that with different delays, when it's about references or it's about DBSs and so forth. But ultimately, we want to make sure we get people in as quickly as possible. The main issue that I think is being flagged by Anne is around that bank, our bank colleagues. So this is mainly in terms of deploying people into clinical areas where they haven't got specific training, such as others. And that reason isn't more around the recruitment per se. It's about being able to have the conversation about clinical competence in terms of deploying someone that they might feel haven't got the full set of competencies that they expect. We've taken that conversation into our operational management meeting and had a conversation with the execs, where we actually have some areas who are starting to pilot, working with colleagues who haven't got that training, but mitigating that by ensuring that we do have people who are best trained, but still using our bank colleagues to do so. So we are working on how do we mitigate that risk, but obviously we don't want to find ourselves in a position where we have deployed people that we know haven't got the competencies to work in certain areas, which isn't safe. But there are restrictions on people working, for example, in community settings where you don't require advanced training. Essentially, I know that in forensic services, there is another service where there's been discussion through operational management team meeting where that is progressing.
So I do know that sorry if I might just add to that. In terms of the timeline, I do know that we get the report that says, well, we're operating about 85 days. I think it's the concept of the triangulation that's the struggle for the NEDs that raise the issue, or for the in that process. In that, when we're talking to newly recruited people, that's not what they're telling us. So then, even if it may not be the number of days, but the perception for them is it's taking a very long time to come in to the system. And I think we just need to balance those two things. We need to work out how to measure those two things so that we're sure that we're collecting the right data to measure the experience. And of course, the other thing is the experience before the vacancy, which is how long does it take to get it banded? How long does it take to get through various other processes? That also seems to be an issue. So, you know, a review of that whole process, I think you would find then we can then start to kind of think through. But I kind of know, I recall the data is there, but it's just not ringing true when we're talking to people. Not that it's not correct, but it's not ringing true when we talk to people.
Can I just add, I think that we have had, I mean, I'm doing induction as well, and I'm very, very clear that what we're talking about in those situations is staff that have been appointed to the temporary staffing service. So that point about, so it's the difference between being recruited and being deployed. It's that, so what we'll find is a substantive member of staff will be deployed sooner than a temporary member of staff will be deployed. The recruitment process may well take the same length of actual recruitment process. So I think that might be a bit of it about your point about if we're not deploying, what's the reason for not doing that? And are we clear that that's appropriate? Because actually, some clinical services will be absolutely appropriate that somebody can't be deployed until they've had their.
That's what I'm trying. Absolutely, I would never advocate that. Yes, never.
And absolutely, I think we've had this conversation in the community around looking at the more pathway. Talked about how do we looking at job descriptions. My belief is that in the NHS, we've got a very small pool of what we call blue jobs. So really, we shouldn't be finding ourselves in a situation where we've got a number of jobs that are waiting to be matched, because how many new jobs are we creating in the NHS? Band 6 clinical posts, these Band 6 clinical posts, and admin posts, and admin posts. So I think there are some times when we tie ourselves into lots or with managers to do that will need to be very niche. So that's something that we're working on, and certainly been bringing assurance to the committee around that. But in terms of the overall piece around recruitment, certainly the issues within bank or temporary staffing are things that we're looking at and piloting in that area in terms of how do we reduce that perception of it's taking longer to be recruited because people are getting onto the bank but not starting to work any shifts because of some of those restrictions. And I think just to add this all to the board, you might recall we had some specific areas of concern around training. Simply was information governance and so on. We actually applied a restriction on our bank colleagues on the basis that we weren't seeing people a significant uptake on bank, and that's had a significant impact where we've moved from 40% of compliance on fundamental training on our temporary staffing to now nearly 95%. So I think it's how we work around some of the issues that we have.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Just wondered whether the committee, just in relation to staff recruitment, what's the ratio of the fact that there is an increase in temporary staffing? So it's like staff recruitment versus an increase in temporary staffing, which will definitely have an impact on finance. What's that currently look like?
Okay, so in terms of the temporary staffing, there is some work that Vanessa and Richard and other colleagues, so also finance, have been doing really to understand the clinical activity, because this is about the demand coming into our bank office, and the highest number of requests are more about clinical activity. So it's understanding where that demand is coming from, because it's not for the bank office to switch off that demand is not deployed, because of course when we have a high number of people on one-to-one observations, that workforce is required. But it's understanding what the demand is and being able to support people clinically in doing that. And I'm sure we've all been out and about where we've seen quite a significant number of people on the ward because of the number of one-to-one observations that they have. So I think it's really thinking about why we're seeing an increase in demand in bank, and how often are we reviewing people might be on one-to-ones, and of course some of the work that Steve has been progressing around understanding what our establishment is actually is. So I think what I can say in summary, I think we have, until we fully establish some of those pieces of work, we're still going to see that increase in demand for our bank, which for me, I think from a patient safety perspective is the right thing. But financially, I think it will take a bit of time for us to see an impact.
Well, it's encouraging to hear that Steve's undertaking, an establishment review, because I was also thinking about, is there, what's the conversion rate from temporary staffing to substantive? If we've got a significant increase of temporary staffing, where are we actually seeing? Is there a conversion rate? Is it about the activities in clinical? Wow, I do understand. I've been on some visits and I've heard about increase in one-to-ones versus obviously the fact that we've talked about seclusions and also how we try to change restrictive practice as well. Will slightly have an impact. So I know there's multi-factors, but because we're seeing this significant increase in temporary staffing, not seeing much of a conversion rate, not understanding what the staffing establishment is. So there's a significant piece of work that needs to be undertaken so that we get a clear picture of where we're at. So that we're not, or we are along in terms of when it comes to increase in our finance and expenses.
Yeah, so in terms of conversion, I think one of the reasons why we've seen an increase in the number of people who are on our bank, when we've done recruitment fairs, we have more healthcare support workers who want to join our bank. In terms of conversion, we have regular messages that go out to our bank colleagues, where in the last year we didn't see as much in terms of conversions. I think we only had about 26 people who converted. And some of the challenges is really around flexible working. How do we ensure that we have a genuine culture of flexible working? Because it's more than just having the policies and procedures that we now have. It's how do we continue to create that culture where people feel that we work flexibly. That's the first thing. The second bit, which is what we're working on, is understanding how we can ensure that we can recruit over and above what we might consider our current establishment. And that would certainly reduce the demand on temporary staffing and increase some consistency. But there's just some work that we need to do with some of the other areas in terms of what are the right numbers of over recruitment, rather than just a figure in the air. And we'll be getting some of that support from our finance colleagues to be able to do that. So that will then be able to create the substantive roles that we can convert people from bank into those roles.
So,
Very quickly, Chair, to just give it assurance to the board. So we're doing those deep dives as well, which I think is a good way to explain it, just around the divisional areas around that bank and agency spend. So we've that's happened with our secure and offender health and acute and urgent care, which is there's high spends there. We know where those challenges are, and we're putting some confirming challenging in place around that. What we'll do is we'll bring that to performance delivery group, and that will then be escalated through either people committee or through sustainability board or performance delivery group. So, FPP committee. So you can see that sort of challenge in there, what we're doing about it. So you've got more of that sort of transparency around the work that's taking place. But you're right, getting the establishment on the wards correct and right is a good starting point, because at the moment we're doing this, but we don't know what that looks like. So we're hoping to have that by September, October time.
I was going to ask that.
Yeah, I think that's the date we're working to this moment in time. I know it's been pushed back, but it's quite a detailed piece of work. So that, along with the deep dive, should actually get us to that point.
So can we have that as an action point then, if you're saying hopefully you'll be able to want to take that work by the end of September?
Am I right? I'm thinking, I know Steve isn't here, he's talking September, October, so we're going to think how that then will.
So to have it as action with the timeline to be agreed.
Yeah, we can do that. Yes, yeah.
I mean, I wanted to make that point, which is that, because you've made the point, Phil, about how we've got major things we need to address because we don't know our establishment, but just to remind the board that actually we had set out a piece of work around M-Post. Yes. That was delayed because of because of M-Post not being supported and us taking it forward without further training. So what we've been trying to work to is the establishment that we understand, plus the care level that we understand in the interim. That should get us to the position that we wanted to be in a year ago.
And engagement of our workforce in the conversation.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Great. So do that. Is any other hands? Down.
No, I think partly covered that. I would say that the risk remains that, after we've done the establishment reviews, it doesn't necessarily mean our banking agency numbers are going to come down. So that's the sort of honest conversation, I guess, we need to have in terms of how do we look at this more strategically or through a different lens. It's a risk, still a big risk.
Yes. James.
Yeah, just to add on that as well, it's that multifaceted approach to that risk. It's not only the establishment reviews, because the governance we have around tracking and ability, the function, effectiveness of the health roster planning, unless you have that data, accurate data, by using the safer staffing module, we can't plan. If we can plan in advance, then we know we are tracking acuity or their spikes. We can have the establishment reviews, but again, we need to see factor in the spike in acuity and that information. How can we plan? Maybe if we know that this patch is high acuity, can we plan ahead and look in advance?
Sure. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to have to draw this discussion to a close, but thank you for
Thank you.
assurance report. So we're going to move to Val. We really need to call back some time. So
Talk to me.
I'll go to questions. Yeah, no, I'll take the two reports as read. Our monthly position is a £288,000 deficit, which was the sort of centre of a lot of our conversation at the last committee meeting. Whilst that's an improved position from month 2, and across the system, I think we are the only trust that has gone that way. Our challenges still remain significant, and the key pressure points, as we've discussed, around out of area temporary staffing. Our agency spend is up to 4%, plus the national target of 3.7%. Our SIP savings aren't coming through as quickly, and we still have a number of identified savings to make. Challenge around that. And Dave will talk about this in his report around low occupancy in the low secure CAMS area. So those are sort of the 4 areas that were really challenging for us. The good news, we're ahead of plan against our capital spend, which is great. But the sort of the key action around all of this was that what we wanted to try and do is get to a point of assurance around the level of urgency, I guess, in terms of are we sort of lifting all the stones that we can to look under to try and bring a position of sort of assurance around financial sustainability. We are probably under the microscope of NHS England from a financial position, and clearly we don't want to be in a position where external intervention is an action that NHS England decide to take. So we do need to be as proactive as possible, and that was the sort of conversation around the assurance that we were looking for from a committee perspective. The specific action around that was that I think we need to be, at the end of this quarter, have a quite robust forecast at the year end to see what it is, in terms of whether we'll break even or whether we're going to be short of that. So in September, hopefully we'll know a little bit more about where we need to go and look, what conversations we need to have, in a much more broader context. And on that, as Adam mentioned, I think colleagues have sort of started to look in other committees around how we can sort of support that sort of financial sustainability going forward, in quality and in people. So that's a really good sort of way forward. The unidentified savings, on that. We've again sort of triangulating the opportunities that we can possibly drive around in the people and quality area, and within the finance SIP area. We're going to look to see if we can sort of come back and review in later this month to see how we can drive more opportunities to close the gap around the sort of the unidentified opportunity gap of £2.5 million in terms of cost improvements. So that will be coming back later this month. What else was there to talk about? We talked about performance. And again, whilst there's lots of activity going on, I think the question around assurance was, are the action plans actually making an impact? I know Vanessa talked about all the deep dives that have taken place, and we were sort of assured around that the teams are doing as much as they can possibly do around sort of looking at the sort of performance areas and making improvements. However, I think we need to get to a point where we can have that conversation about are those action plans actually going to have the right level of impact to turn up those performance indicators around, and if not, then how do we look at that more strategically across the trust, again through a different lens? And I think very quickly we need to be in a position to try and have those conversations, sooner rather than later. And the action again around that was to, we'll bring a couple of deep dives to the finance committee, and Vanessa and Dave will hopefully identify a couple of areas where we can really get into the detail of what's going on there and make some recommendations back to board. So that's really it in a summary. I'll have to take questions.
Are there any questions for Belle?
Not a question, but the other thing was there was a bit in about mental health provider collaborative plan and what we're going to go through. So it's probably worth noting that. So I don't think we've got it here. It will go to the commissioning committee, but we did have that discussion.
Just wanted to ask if the committee actually, it's just a point that I've raised, I think previously before, considered the title of the committee, FPP, to include digital on that, because I think it's really important going forward. And I wondered as well, I don't know if Carl has actually recently presented any papers, but how are we utilising AI in relation to helping us with some of our services, with appointments, with fast tracking? Have we got any report on that?
Okay, so a report did go in the last, and I can't remember exactly when it was, but it does come on a quarterly basis. So there's quite a detailed report went not so long ago around that. We do need to do more about that in a concerted way, because we're really clear in terms of which services and how would digital make a difference in that. And we've talked about that for quite a period of time. We've got to be much more exact around that. And it does need a discussion between the two parts, both the services and the techs. Now, I've said that lots of times. We've really got to turn that into, it's going to make a difference. So we've got to focus based on what's in the clinical strategy, where we want to put the time and effort. There is a lot of stuff that's done under the radar that made a difference around the whole series of those, but I think we've got to be much more transparent about that and make sure it's really articulated properly, so you can then sell the benefits to others as well.
Yeah.
Then if you want to add anything on.
Yeah, and I think that's right, Dave. And we are doing things more in teams. So, for example, Solar Eye, our children and people's team is Solihull. They've got a real great digital offer, and we're applying a digital offer also in our talking therapies. So that's sort of working with another organisation who will be looking at people who are waiting to come into the service, what digital offer can we offer there before they go into either group or one-to-one therapy. So I think we need to draw it out. I think it's a good challenge, and actually how we start to grow that even more, because it is in the clinical strategy. We will transform via digital. And I think it's conversations I've had with Carl and James Reed, who sort of are our experts. They said, we can do whatever you want. But the teams are saying, we're not quite sure what we want. So if we maybe present it as, yeah, absolutely. If we present and say, oh, it'd be really good if we could do this, then it's how we can work around it. I think it's getting people into the room and having that conversation to take that forward.
It would be good to see some kind of piece of paper around that in terms of our digital offer, how it's actually making a difference in terms of our service provision. Are we actually accessing the digital transformation funding as well?
We do where we can. In a lot of cases, actually, it rewards those that are behind the path on it.
we've done a lot over a long period of time, so we're actually quite well off for this. We're not capitalising on it as well as we should be. But most of the funding goes to areas that have got digital poor and stay around a bit.
And then there's Linda in the back, and then there is, I think, something.
You know, it was the coming together of how you drive, I suppose it's improving the quality of services, but it's under which framework do we do that? And do we put the digital into the quality improvement framework so that that's always a consideration in any project, that's a sort of integral part of how are we going to address this?
Sure.
And you raised a really good point about how the savings will come through in the other committees. So, for example, one of our thinkings around the rostering is that if we get that right and tweak it really well, that potentially could have cost improvement impact. So it's that again, that what's the overarching framework for what we're doing? Is it quality or is it cost improvement? And it sits really closely together, doesn't it?
Should be quality and which drives efficiency.
Yeah. And but to have that discussion within the quality improvement project.
That's right. The quality improvement bit should drive and pull in the digital. So by identifying what you're trying to do, you can work out, will any of this help me do that? The problem is you can do stuff and it doesn't make any difference. So being really clear about what do we want this service to look like and how do you make it sustainable should drive that through.
Yes, so I think it's just on the aspect of digital, because in terms of the goals that we have within the strategy, we've got that goal within people, and we're already starting to have conversations about mapping our processes to look at how we use AI. So I think there's probably a way of looking at it, which is thinking about what digital support across all our 4 strategic priorities, so that we can see where we might need to put our energy, because otherwise we end up putting the services kind of competing for the same resources for digital. So I think being able to prioritize around where we want to put our efforts, I think might be helpful.
So who's going to pull?
I think we take that conversation to the executive team in the first instance, because I think what we've heard is that we're keen to take a different approach. And in which case, I think if we have a conversation with the executive to start with, and then we can consider how we adapt our approach.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, all I was going to say, perhaps something the executive into their conversation and consider sort of a single change program lens. Starting at the very high level in terms of where we want to be at the end of our sort of strategic journey, and then working our way back in terms of how we're going to establish those specific services that we're going to offer in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, or whatever that might look like, and how then we're going to underpin those with type of staff, digital offerings, etc. And that starts to then combine it all under a single change initiative. Whereas at the moment we sort of looking at it through various different lenses. We've got performance, we've got establishment, which is looking at it from the bottom up as well as the top down. We've got digital strategy, which is doing a lot of things, which may be underpinning a lot of the establishment. But it'd be nice to see that all come together, into sort of one sort of visible program of work.
I think that's the work that we've already committed to do around bringing our strategy more to life. What you're talking about is the strategy.
Yeah.
And so there's a commitment already around the challenge around, actually what's this going to look like? What might it look like in the future? So I think there's something very specific that we can talk about in terms of digital around pointer as an executive team around how are we going to ensure that we are looking through a digital lens through all 4 elements in the strategy, and how might we promote that, and what approach we're going to take to it, how might we put it together in terms of what's actually working now versus what we need to do in the future.
Just to back up about the strategic change approach can often give you a greater opportunity to identify gaps in terms of work to achieve that goal, but also where there's duplication, or unnecessary contribution, and be with me, bits of work that don't actually contribute. So, I think that approach is really helpful. The mapping part of that process can be really helpful, thinking about it in that sort of.
And I suppose that's what I would say in response is that the message in the organisation is if it doesn't fit in our strategy, why are we doing it? So I think that the whole point of doing the strategy the way we did around getting that, really clear and wide engagement was so that there was ownership, and that there was, and it was also about the idea that we had hundreds of priorities and things going on that didn't fit. So that's very much the message. And I think that the issue we've got here is how we're communicating what's actually being done.
It is the storytelling, and as Ned's, as we sort of dip in and out of this, it's to sort of simplify that story as possible, as best as possible, which is hugely complicated, don't get me wrong. Would be an advantage, and it does help in terms of the storytelling, and it does help in terms of making an impact externally to patients and external stakeholders looking in, as well as employees and staff from within the organisation.
Well, we look forward to seeing something like that. Sorry, Patrick.
Yeah, just to add, we've had a meeting with the Landtex just to start to think about what that framework looks like. So that's still in draft. This further work and engagement that's taking place for us to be able to report back into the committee around community and the board to what that would look like. And certainly a big part of it is about comms. And how do we start to celebrate some of what we've done in the past 2 years, and also begin to articulate what that would look like moving forward. So I feel that we have something now that we're starting to build, and it's something that we'll continue to adapt as we move forward.
Great, brilliant. So after you've had that discussion with exec, something will likely come back.
So I think two things. One is that the exec conversation is going to be about the digital.
That's correct.
And the framework is an action that's already been taken. And what we're waiting for is the timeline for when it will land.
Okay. So two actions there. Thank you. We've got to go back to some shape. So it's over to you. Okay.
So I'm support, I won't repeat all the stuff that's already been said, apart from the fact that we have improved in a month. I'd expect for the full year that we will break even, but it's how we do that is the problem. So we know we've got non-recurring flexibility. A lot of the others in retail also have got non-recurring flexibility. But the problem with the scale of the change in the month and how widespread it is across the organisations does mean that NHSE are alerted to that. So the danger is it's what they come in to support, and it's how much control we get around that. So the discussion's been about that piece. The only thing I'll mention is about the Uffculmes. What we've agreed that we're going to do is raise this with the CAMS provider collaborative. I know there's been some discussion with Matt Bozeman over there about how we do it. So it's not necessarily we do a closure of the unit. It's more about how do we make sure that we've got a service that responds to the need as opposed to what it currently is. There's a number of reasons why we can't provide exactly what's required at the minute. We need to work that through. I think that's still being worked through.
I think it's really well clear in public that from our perspective, there are a number of options around how we deliver that service and what happens to it. So I think associating the word closure, I think it's an inaccurate position to be talking about at the moment. So we're very clear about jointly working with the collaborative around what the options for how that service can be delivered or otherwise is it required. Going forward.
And it's important to recognise that the change around provider collaboratives means you're more likely to have that conversation about rather than you have one organisation decide that it's in isolation, you've got to look at the overall system and work out how to use that differently.
Should we just say forensic, i.e. secure child and adolescent mental health services, is what Uffculme stands for. We just used it a lot, and I don't think people won't know what we're talking about. It's quite a significant service for us.
No questions. There's only much has already been said around.
Sure. Any other questions? Jenny, just wanted to ask, there's not many SIP programs, or efficiency saving, yes. Has that actually been reconsidered given the pressures that we're actually under?
So we do that on an ongoing basis, look at what we can do. We have regular discussions with services. We're looking also at what we can do to tighten and control things. We had that discussion with services. I think we talked about that before. The plan is, I think it's tomorrow, we've got performance delivery to pick up what we talked about in there and how they would choose to do that. What we do need to do is make sure, as we've said several times, get into the transformative piece, because that's what we're going to do to make a fundamental difference. We've just got to get that far. There's also work that's going on across the piece at BSOL level. So, for instance, KPMG can be commissioned to talk to all the different organisations about things. I had my discussion, I think, Regina had a discussion yesterday. That's to allow us to understand some of the opportunities, some of which will go across the piece. There's also work that's going on in terms of understanding what you can do around professional support services, back office around to earn them, to understand how we can operate at a different scale from what we do in the minute. Now you don't get each organisation trying to be self-sufficient. There's no way we can do that. And indeed, it doesn't allow you to do what you need to do as a system. So it's into that space that we are at this stage. That doesn't mean to say there's obvious answers, and that's the problem. The difficulty is really being able to encapsulate. When you talk about community transformation, what you're really talking about is actually out there, the population that's in a particular community is where you do the majority of it and support it. You only come into the centre or into acute inpatient beds if you really need to. At the minute, it feels to me like it's a bit clear, and you do things out there as well. It's got to be the entire system looking through. There was a lot done around older people's service 3 or 4 years ago with an organisation called Newton that makes a real difference. We're right at the state centre. You've got to do that type of change going through this, drawing these things forward.
Thanks. There are no further questions for David. It's the Audit Committee Chair's assurance report. Is that me? It's got your name.
Yes, Winston not.
Winston's on it.
The report's quite straightforward.
It is really. So it's really to pull out if there's anything in there that you want to draw the board's attention to. If not, it's fine. We can just ask. I can open up for questions.
I off the top of my head, I don't recall anything significant that needs to come to board. And apologies if I hadn't prepared myself for this, but yeah, there's nothing significant that was raised that's noteworthy.
It's okay, Bob wasn't at the meeting.
Oh, wasn't okay.
I was just saying,
So
the key thing was the rate side conversation. We had
Yes,
there was a lot of anxiety about rate side.
yes.
A few, what you thought, yeah.
We also talked at length about single tender wages, went through the
Yes.
process, etc. So there was a degree of additional assurance over and above what the paper was in there.
Mhm.
We went through that at detail, but as Anne said, it's those.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other comments in relation to the Audit Committee assurance report, we'll move on to the integrated performance report.
So again, not repeating what's already been said, the committee chairs, the aspects of the different parts of performance. Just to summarise what we've said that we're going to do, is making sure anything that's not seen as being core, i.e. part of the integrated performance report at this stage, we're clear about that, will get escalated by who when it goes off. So let's make sure we cover that. The problem is, there's literally hundreds of different metrics we could report on in a week in the chat. Building on what we've already talked about, both the performance delivery group and the deep dives, we're looking at that entire piece to try and make sure we're making this work properly going through. A lot of that will be formalised in what we currently do, but the discussion that Machine talked about before, where we talked to others about this and what they've done elsewhere, one of the suggestions was you start in those meetings with a piece about the risks in an area, which changed the nature of the discussion. So Vanessa's observed an organisation down south and how they've done it slightly different, which we can learn from. We've all got the same type of issues, and there's not an ideal. Everyone struggles with this, but we can be certainly a bit more focused and make sure it flows through, so it actually properly feeds the committees there's already been described in the triangulated way, so you described the different aspects of the committees, is how we get potentially cross-committee working or discussion going on. Don't look, is there anything you want to add on that?
No, I suppose just really quickly, I mean, observing, the organisation was really good. I think we're on the right path to doing that. But we're just very, very mindful that, real executive support there. Both supportive and sort of, challenging as well. I think, starting with, what we've done really well, what our challenges are, our risks are, and then working through and having real sort of transparency of all the different teams in the division. So at the moment, we don't have oversight of some of those because we know they're working well, but actually we still need to acknowledge that. So I'm working with Tasman Kiddy, who's our Associate Director of Performance, around what that is going to look like, the new agenda for our performance delivery group. And we've got a couple of deep dives, Belle, that we're going to pull through to next FPP, Planners Plan and Performance Committee. So we'll see what the conversations have been happening. And it goes back to Roisin's point around, the accountability, the local involvement, and getting a real grassroots approach to them bringing back up to board. So it's in transition, and I'm feeling a lot more confident that we'll actually get to that point and I've actually seen it how it would work and in operation. So yeah, watch this space.
Any other questions for Dane? Just noted in the integrated performance, it does talk about in relation to sustainability that the statement plans are still yet to be identified, which you made reference just previously about. And I wanted to ask the question around people. It says continues to be adversely affected by COVID. Is that this is at the top line commentary?
So we do have some COVID outbreaks. So we don't report them or treat them in the same way as we do. So, so some of the issues that we've got around staffing. So yesterday, for example, secure and offender health and particular issues that were impacted by anything
Yeah, I want to be clear that this wasn't a legacy kind of still affected.
I don't know whether it's
Well, that is very useful.
the point is that we are seeing some like
Yes, it's not, no, it's
we're treating it very differently.
Just be really clear on the commentary there. It is carried from, actually, we're talking about things have been problematic since we went into COVID. So you've got some pre-COVID to COVID issues now, still. We've got this thing about where it's been described actually understanding what the duties of the boards actually is now. You've got people have got used to the establishments or the staff that was on wards during COVID, and that's not necessarily where it needs to be. So it's probably a misnomer to really put that in scale around it.
Yeah, I think that's what I was actually getting at, really. We cannot just use that terminology because it almost feels like a badge of lips. So, yeah,
I think just one point, because we've mentioned it a few times, just from an out of area perspective. Obviously, it hasn't sort of improved our financial position, but from a service users to place out of area and the bed days, it's an improving position. And that's our productivity plan beginning to sort of take hold. Again, we know we've got a long way to go with that. We have help from the system as well, and with our ICB colleagues around what we can do differently working together. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. I think we've all shown in line in our agenda. Patiently waiting outside and popped out to him, so we're running a little bit late. So he's going to come in. Thank you. So for those of you who may not have the agenda, this is the next report of the Southern Health Services Limited Business Report, and that's our subsidiary company. And Shane is the Chief Exec of Southern Health Services Limited, and he's just going to present his report. I do apologise in the public meeting for keeping Shane so late. It was scheduled for 11:30, so you want to give it to a whistle stop. Thought for your report. I'm sure we'll open up for any questions afterwards.
Thank you very much and good morning. And I know that you are running late, so I take it that it was read the report. So all I was really going to do was just give maybe sort of three areas. What our key challenges are, what we think, what are the key positives that's happening within SSL today, and maybe a couple of opportunities. So our key challenges at the moment are laundry services. At the moment, laundry services is a national issue. It's an issue for the trust and it's an issue for us. We've got a very poor performing laundry provider who's a national provider, and we're looking now at how we can mitigate that risk. We're looking at potentially doing some joint ventures, and SSL is looking to see whether we could actually provide some form of laundry service back to the trust, but that could take anything between 12 and 18 months. Tilbury Valley is a food producer that we use in the north. Unfortunately, that business went bust. Once again, a national company, NHSE were very aware of it, and they put in some contingencies and some solutions. We'd already done that. We'd already had contingencies in place. And there was no disruption to supply or to food going into any of the units, and that continues to be the case. However, the solution, it's not a long-term solution. It's certainly a medium-term solution, but I think the longer-term solution is what we're considering from an SSL point of view, is whether we could do some investment to actually put our in-house capacity up to be able to help to supplement that supply. Water management, as I think the trust would be aware, we've got over 50 buildings, we've got 700 bedrooms, and we manage water as part of the water safety group. Unfortunately, we still have one problem site, which is Forward House. It's been a problem site. We've been working with the water safety group, which is the trust, ourselves, and the clinical teams, and external experts to try to resolve this particular challenge. We're now onto the engineering solutions. So we've done all the sort of the stuff that you should do: check in, recheck in, make sure it's flushed, etc. But we're now looking at the engineering element. So we're looking at properly taking out pipework, maybe changing how the flow of water goes into the building. We see that there's a solution. It's just been a lot longer coming than we actually anticipated. And lastly, in terms of challenges, access to capital. Capital has been a challenge for I think the NHS, and particularly for the trust and for SSL. We've got some key projects that we'd like to get on with, and we just can't have access to it. So they're the sort of key challenges. The positives, I would say, is that, and as I was talking to one of your colleagues earlier, our staff, I think, are now in a really positive place. I think we're fully engaged with our staff. We have regular communications with them. I think they have. It's all about retain, develop, and grow. And so, with regards to retain, I think the engagement piece actually works for us. We have regular updates on our weekly, bi-monthly, and regular meetings. With regards to development, we're looking at setting up a specific training site where it pulls all together all of our training, whether that's for development or even just basic skills. And the last thing is we're introducing SSL's futures, which is effectively an apprentice and graduate scheme. We recognise that actually our management, more than sort of 60% of our management are over 50. And if we went a bit further, that's probably over 60 as well. And therefore we do need to bring new blood into the organisation. We're bringing in new software, both in terms of menus, food, and in terms of maintenance. We are looking with regards to the pharmacy. The existing robot, which we invested in 8 years ago, is coming to end of life, and we're looking at what we can do next. The next version adds even more value, I think, and we're working on that as we speak. FSL has moved into a new warehouse in July, which actually helps the trust in terms of its PPE and other services. But we've also got some offices there, as we've vacated Birmingham as the rest of the trust have. So those are some of the key positives, and the key opportunities are still. SSL is still developing we are leaders in PFI management, and we are currently working with 4 other trusts to help them with their PFI management. That has some future opportunities for future revenue and future development. Primary care, so we're still working with primary care. We're looking to hopefully extend our existing contract by another 3-5 years with BSOL. And the ICS or ICB also gives us an opportunity. We're looking at how we can be the supplier of choice for that. And we're working with some of the key partners within the ICS on a couple of projects, one of which is transport. And transport for me is one of those really simple things. We've all got lorries and vans and everything else that crisscross Birmingham, and we should be doing it as an integrated system, not as a separate system. That's it.
Shane, thank you very much. Are there any questions, Shane?
It's good to see that the conversations are starting about with partners, potential partners, hopefully, around Rayside. I was just wondering when you thought we might, and it might be longer review, when we might have something to look at, you know, what our options are.
So
I'm quite keen to progress that.
what we're trying to do is not just pick up the infrastructure piece, which is what Shane's talking about this time. We had a discussion with Kima about, and picking up what's said here at the board previously when we had staff here talking about Rayside, trying to make sure we understand what will be helpful in those areas as well.
Right.
So we will include as part of next year's capital programme, probably in the next couple of years, is a range of things that are both service and staff related, but also infrastructure related. So the plan is, as part of developing the capital programme for next year, so between now and the end of the year, we'll be clear about what we plan to do. The danger is if you just look at Rayside in isolation without the overall capital needs, you'll be targeting needs in isolation. Great stuff back earlier, but it really about, unless you understand the overall piece, we can't work out what the overall plan for next year should be.
Yeah, I suppose I mean, given we've got the business case for Rayside, is that not included in?
What that does describe, if you're going back and you're doing this properly, you develop a full unit. So it talks about where we'd end up and what that would look like. What we're talking about here is, until we've got that, we've got to come up with something that improves from where we currently are. We've got some short-term infrastructure issues that we'd have to put some money into addressing. And what was played through the staff experience isn't great as either. So we want to be able to describe that overall. This is, if you like, an interim, pending that being done. That's the only way you'll do that.
Right, yeah.
And then no sign of any large capital when available, which we could be relying on because it's a complete build.
Yeah, exactly.
And the trust have performance of interest in 4 major capital projects. There have been a number of major capital schemes that have been announced nationally of the 40 and the 8. The 8, which were the ones that we were going for, there was 120 bids for eight potential opportunities. We didn't get any of those. Hence the reason why it's a real challenge. And we are looking at various options to see whether we can do something in terms of capital to try to bring in some money to be able to develop, if, as Dave mentioned, an interim solution, because we recognise that Wayside is a real challenge.
We're continuing to raise nationally the issue of parity and lack of capital investment in mental health. And the impact. So we continue to do that.
I would hope that we are though looking also at other opportunities of getting larger scale capital, partnering up with other organisations, I don't know, housing associations, other people who've got capital, basically. Yeah, well, it's just I'm not aware of any of that. So that's been
whatever you do, literally, whatever you do, it's still constrained by the capital resources limit. So you're not allowed to, even if you go think outside it and go through quite innovative ones, it's still trapped. That's the difficulty. So I've got 78 million quid in the bank. They do operate, I'm not allowed to.
It's a whole other debate that I'm not sure because there's a lot of frustration.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just before you go, Shane, just wanted, what is the timeline on forecast in terms of the you know, the water management, the issue there, the fact that it's been a very long time to actually draw it to a conclusion?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to give you a conclusion, a date, because because we're still working with the experts and we're still working with the water safety group to implement the various actions that we need to do. The engineering works are taking place in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And once we've actually put in line filters this week, but the actual pipe work and potential change of whether we use a tank fill system or direct fill is going to happen in the next 2 to 3 weeks. After that, we do some retesting. It takes about a month to actually get whether we got positive or negative tests. So you are still talking probably 4 to 6 weeks before we understand whether the work that we've done is actually been successful or not.
That has had a knock-on effect then to utilising that unit for people who need long-term rehab. So
Absolutely, we're very aware of that.
I know.
Very
I
aware.
mean, we certainly had a discussion at the executive team this week about that actually when we do get to a conclusion, we probably would like to go back jointly and do some kind of lesson learning.
Absolutely.
Has the process we've undertaken been appropriate, or is there learning for if it's ever happened again?
But we would absolutely, welcome the opportunity to obviously participate in that.
James, last question.
Yeah, thanks for the report. For clarification, the EH4 inspections for burglary, is that against the NHS England national standards?
It's environmental health. So all restaurants, whether you're health or whether you deal with the general public, have to go through an environmental health check. And if you go into a restaurant, you'll see that it's got a star rating. So anything from 1 to 5. So we had two sites actually, where the environmental health came in and they effectively check your food processing, your food management, and how clean everything is, and they give you a star rating. We got 5 stars, which is very good. We're aware that there are other parts of Birmingham that have been tested on the same sort of thing that don't get 5 stars. So we're very pleased.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, James. Shane, thank you. I think it's a pleasure.
I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Good report.
Yeah, thanks for well done. Okay, we have the annual medical appraisal and job planning here. I'm sure we've all had a chance to read it. So And it's been through people, so I'm not necessarily going to ask you for these to present it, just wanted to ascertain whether anybody got any specific questions from that. I know that I put something on the theme, and it was just, I just wanted to get an understanding of the PA's programme activities. You can have up to maximum up to 13, and I just wanted to get an idea of what's our average here in terms of programme activities.
It's much lower, definitely, it's not that. So we've got a lot of part-time doctors,
Right.
flexible working, so the people who are over 10 are not that many, the overall workforce. And 13 below.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No? Okay, so there are a number of reports that David has presented, which is review and update of the BAF, the cover sheet. So we're going to take these as read, the commission BAF, and also the draft board risk appetite survey monkey. So with those three items there, are there any questions that people have had a chance? Anne?
Only just to comment that we did agree at people that we would split that one.
Yeah.
I don't think in this document it's split it.
You know, it's been done.
Oh, it's done, it is.
Yeah, it's been done.
Okay,
Yeah, we developed into the food risk here.
okay.
It's taken on board the new version of the BAF, it's taken on board all the comments that were made by the various board committees.
Okay.
Taking those comments on board, as well as it permits the board to perform one of its key functions around risk management, which is that of oversight and scrutiny as well. So the request is for the board to scrutinize and to approve. That's the act.
Yeah.
So we don't miss that, please, Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Our BAF runs into 60 pages. It's a reflection of the new strategy and the key risks to the delivery of those strategies. So it's important that when colleagues read reports from elsewhere, the question should be, are risks reflected on the relevant risk registers and not on the BAF? Because the BAF is linked to the strategy.
Yes.
So other reports would talk about operational issues, which need operational risk, which is reflected on operational risk registers within the divisions. Yeah. So the question of the division is it reflected on your risk register? One of the other key things to take home is the fact that we are taking our BAF away from the board to the divisions, so that they get identified with the BAF. So they answer the question, how can they contribute to the mitigation on the BAF by the things they do on a day-to-day basis? Yes. So we've had that conversation and Vanessa invited me to the Operation Delivery Group and I presented there as well. The next phase of this project will be around the corporate register, making sure that the organization has a corporate register and defining that corporate register to get that forward.
Yeah, because the next phase at the moment, do we? A corporate risk register.
Well, no, there is, but it's not really recognised as being so effective. The corporate risk registry is anything that's over 15 comes out of operational one, but we don't see it. What is during this including is reference to the individual risk that's in the corporate risk register, but you couldn't really transparently point to it.
Right. Okay.
We're trying to make that correlation, like David's articulated really well, to frontline risks and that link then back to the board assurance framework. So what are our sort of key risks and how are we addressing that as a, from a non-strategic point of view across the organisation? So working train, I think, is that, again, trying to get that understanding between that.
I think for the cocoa bar, we can pick that up in the next meeting around cocoa. We'll pick that in more details if need arises. But the most important thing around the survey was that this was a piece of work where that emanated from the strategic board development session, and the risk appetite is owned by the board and it's a board product. So it's very important that the board devotes time to it as well. So we agreed to go through a survey process to get us agree on some of the risk levels that we are prepared to accept in order to deliver our strategy. So I will, if the board is happy with the format and the structure of the questions and the survey, I will circulate this at the end to the members of the board, the team members of the board, for them to sort of identify where they sit. Yeah. And once we have got a perspective of which areas take more weight, we'll be able to adapt that as as our preferred risk category for that type of risk, where there is no clear-cut choice. We will be coming back again for that conversation to take that forward.
Happy to approve that process and for that certainly. James?
Yeah, just to add around the divisional risk registers and the corporate risk register above and the alignment. You mentioned the risk appetite for the above risks. I wonder if there's some work to be done for the divisional people, leads, the risks they are holding. What is their appetite? Is it that they don't know that they need to escalate them, go to the corporate or the above? So that alignment of the division related escalation to
The risk appetite is applicable to all risk.
But it's
rather than workplace. So what we're going to do is to take that message down, so that if a division, for example, is accepting a false risk at the target risk score of a 6, does that marry with our risk appetite framework as adapted by the board? That will be the conversation at their governance meeting, and they challenge them.
So this will come back again to the board.
Yeah, we're coming back again as a regular oversight and scrutiny exercise, but not for approval. But in case, but for the risk appetite, it will now be inserted once the format that has been adapted will come back here for ratification and approval. Then it will be inserted into the risk management policy, which has been updated, and that can now be populated, and we could now start delivering training and having conversations within the divisions around that, how we actualize risk management across the business.
Right, thank you. Thanks, David. But there's a good piece of work, very good piece of work. So congratulate you for what you've done. It's very clear and easy to follow, and I'm sure when it gets cascaded down to business as well, they can make things up also. Okay, so we're happy to approve. Yes, essentially. Brilliant. Okay, so in relation to questions from the public, and I read out obviously the procedure we do have on question from the public. Would you like to read the question? Yes, please.
Me, thank you very much. For anyone who doesn't know who I am, my name is Sheila Musgrave. I am a peer carer of a young person whose care should fall under the trust. My question is general though, because I appreciate you can't focus on one person, but it is based on personal experience. So my interest is around the timescale to initial assessment and early review of care on transfer to the trust for somebody who is discharged under Section 117 aftercare. I did provide background to my question. I don't know if you had a chance to read that. I hope you're all familiar with Section 117 aftercare, but for anyone who might not be, it's a duty to provide aftercare. It's a legal duty on health and social care to provide aftercare, which begins immediately the person leaves hospital. And its purpose is to support people during that transition into the community to ensure that there's a minimal risk to then declining and having to go back into hospital. So the continuity of care is essential for somebody in that process. In fact, I would say continuity of care is essential for anybody. My focus is on Section 117. I do think this is generally in all honesty. What I found really difficult was to pinpoint what the trust's or the board's understanding of the trust's timescale for this initial medical review is. You've got a number of policies. You've got a joint Section 117 aftercare policy with Birmingham City Council. You've got an admission, transfer, discharge and community follow-up policy, and you've got a referrals and appointments policy. Now, each of those has different timescales in it as to how somebody should be followed up into the trust. So what I would like to understand is, as a board, what is your expectation of the trust in meeting this legal duty and the timescale that you would expect to ensure continuity of care? What is the timescale to that initial medical review of somebody being discharged into your care, into a community mental health trust. I hope I have narrowed that way down. My question was slightly more vast than that, but that's what I'm really interested in. There is more that I would like to ask, but I'm aware of the timescale. Because I also want to highlight that your joint section 117 aftercare policy has changed, and you've removed the 28-day initial referral, which to me is not in best interests of service users, but rather more, excuse my cynicism here, it rather more gives, it doesn't mean you have to be held to failing to meet that 28-day period, which as somebody on the outside looking in, it feels as though, well, actually, who is accountable for ensuring that those most at risk of going back into hospital are actually getting appropriate access to care? I hope that kind of summarises what I would like to know.
Thank you, Sheila. And we really welcome the idea that you gave us in advance an idea of what you wanted to ask. And I also think that we want to fully acknowledge with you, and I particularly acknowledge because of my previous interactions with you, that you are coming at this from very much a kind of holistic. This isn't about you and your family. This is about more generally how things operate in the trust and mental health services more generally. So I wanted to really kind of acknowledge that and say thank you for it. And I think the difficulty for us being able to specifically answer the complexity of the questions is that it is complex, as you described. Actually, this is a joint policy between two organisations, and we now have two different levels of responsibility. So we've just inherited responsibility for the commissioning and ongoing aftercare around Section 117 individual packages of care by becoming the lead provider for the provider collaborative. So that has opened our eyes to a very clear need to really rethink how Section 117 is working in Birmingham and Solihull. Your point about levels of follow-up is also implicated by the care programme approach and the allocation of a coordinator and how that operates. And that too is seen as a particularly national issue at the moment around how that's operating. And we are certainly moving, as is the trend, away from, and is a requirement actually, away from the care programme approach. And we recognise that in the midst of that change and transition, that we need to constantly be thinking about the level of risk that we're putting families under, but also that service users and our services are under. But I know, Vanessa, you in particular wanted to have a few things that you wanted to say about this.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Sheila. I mean, I'm thinking, do you want to come and work with us and help us with this? So, so I'm not sure I get a bit of sort of, that feedback. I think would be really, really good. So, I mean, there's two sort of things going on at the moment. So, just building on what Sheila said then. So I'm working with partners in the system around 117 and aftercare. So we had a workshop back in April around what does it look like? Where are the challenges? So it's really good working with our local authority colleagues, experts by experience, all in a room in that workshop. There's some sort of three things that came out of it when we first marked paperwork there. One was around reviewing our memorandum of understanding with the local authority, because I think you're right, there's some sort of confusion around those time frames in there, so that needs absolutely refining. That would then go back to our policies, to making sure we've got those joined up policies, and again taking the opportunity to work across our system. So it's with our other NHS colleagues who work with us. So what is that going to look like, and how that pans out. The CPA and care programme approach, we're doing a big piece of work in the organisation around, our NHS England and colleagues have said, we'd like to look at this and work differently. So we've got one of our clinical directors, Sadira Darren, who's leading a piece of work around Dialogue Plus, which is a very, very different way of writing, formulating a care plan with a service user. It's not doing it to me sitting here doing it. You have to work with a service user, you have to work with their family. And it's a really, really, it's great to be nationally sort of recognised, so that's really good.
That's taken a year to roll out because we have to go to all the teams, roll it out, probably too much detail here, but you know, it'd be good if you could get more involved with this. So that work is in train at the moment because obviously it's acknowledging we need to make a change, but what is the right format and way of working with our service users, carers, and helping and supporting our training and our staff to do that as well. And then the other sort of stream of work that came out of the workshop was shaping our market. So again, we acknowledge that we have some delays, some challenges, some complexities around working with other partners in our system. So again, what does our market look like? And again, being a commissioner and a provider, we can actually look at who's out there. You know, I mentioned earlier around, you know, some of our hard to hear groups, you know, around sort of our diverse groups that live in our communities, and actually how do we engage them around that wider offer. So there's lots of stuff going on. I probably could talk for 20 minutes if my voice wasn't about to go. But would welcome you working with us on that piece of work and sharing your experience. So that's as a little sort of starter for 10. Does
So I
that?
think in terms of your question about,
I can think you haven't actually answered my comments. Are you free to medical review? That's all I'm looking for.
so in terms of the board's expectation, yeah, very clear that we've got some confusion at the moment, and that what Vanessa has described is the work that we're doing jointly with others and with other staff around determining what it's going to look like. In the meantime, we are doing that risk assessment work around people who are waiting, so that we can be clear about prioritisation from that point of view. But I think the real, we're happy to have a more a kind of deeper conversation about that. But I think the key thing for us is that point about inviting you to kind of work with us on that. So we've got some experts by experience already, but it would be really great to have you as a carer and somebody who's had that experience to support us in understanding what we're planning. Is it going to cut the mustard?
Yeah. So essentially what you're saying is you don't have a time frame. Nobody can be held accountable for failing to support on immediate discharge at this point in time. That's the current, and that's why
I think immediate discharge would be picked up under with our home treatment teams. So we have a target that is nationally set around seeing someone within 7 days. We're really stretching ourselves and trying to do that within 3 days. Yes, I know. So, you know, we have that target and we always aim to try and meet that target from a home treatment team perspective. I think where our challenges are, which we'll be really open and honest with, is around that wider care coordination, community mental health team, and goes back to the challenges that I articulated in the report around that. So I think it's a fair challenge. I think we need to be thinking about how we can start giving some assurance as board members around the work that we're doing, because at the moment that's kind of in its infancy, but we need to be seeing it here. So I think it's a fair challenge.
Yeah, so I think the accountability around follow-up is something that really
Yes.
the points that the interplay between section 117 care programme approach, allocation of care coordinators is the bit that we're saying is a bit confused at the moment, and we recognise and are recognise nationally that that's the case, and working towards getting to a clearer place around that.
I can just add that the community teams also have the GP worker system. So there's a GP worker who then has access to a doctor if needed. And also the home treatment teams have doctors. So if they did need an urgent medical review, that would be looked at.
there's a wider issue going on as well on a personal basis. Yeah, so it's not something that's accessible at this moment in time. So, you know, there's lack of coordination between trusts within Birmingham as well. So, yeah.
Presumably we can pick that up in the collaborative.
Well, we absolutely can. I think that's a bit about the wider, particularly now we've just developed, we went live and then around the mental health provider collaborative, which was designed to address some of the things that you just described around different handovers, different organisations, coming, I think, from different perspectives. So it's designed to pull that out of the system.
And certainly within the plan, within that, although we're not. This conversation is about our lead provider or thing. In that piece of work, there is specific targeted work to improve the stuff that's happening around 117, if I might put it. Remember, I'm a lay person coming to understand it, but as far as I'm aware, that whole focus approach as an approach to 117s is being reviewed actively in a collaborative way. Now, obviously, we've only just started that process, so you know, you need to give people slightly a chance to get that right. I accept that people might have thought, well, we're still doing
Yeah,
that, but
it's all very well recognising, and Phil, I think you were very clear, you said, you know, that the health deteriorates during waiting, which increases risks. And that's what families are managing out of the community, because there is this lack of clarity and staff shortages, etc. So, you know, we are not the only family that are going to be through this kind of situation at this point in time. But the impact on families is massive. And it does feel like there is no accountability because of haziness, because of work going on, because of changes as to who's holding work. So, you know, there is personal frustration, excuse me if that's come across in how I've sounded. But yeah, it's just, you know I can be vocal about these things. I know there's many people who can't be vocal about these things. And yeah, it's quite sad as families to know somebody has come out from an extended stay in hospital at a good level, and then you start to watch a decline and think, when does somebody step in? You know, you're sitting in front of consultants and say, yeah, you know, I know you need more, but we can't give you anything. You know, that's really hard as families to hear that, never mind the service user to hear something like that. When you think that Section 117 is there to support and place that legal duty on health and social care. I have to say social care have been brilliant. There's no issues with social care on Section 117. They're on it, which is a new experience and very welcome. And I'd really hoped that we were coming into that within the trust as well. So yes, I do think there's a lot of work to be done on Section 117. But perhaps we need a conversation outside of here.
Yeah, and we also are very aware that you've lodged some of that experience with us, and we're in a position of, you know, we are now looking to formally respond to that. So
yeah, because that also picks up the conversion from PAL's contact to complaint, formal complaint. That was an interesting experience. I hoped we could deal with everything through PAL's. And PAL's told me you have to make it a formal complaint. I didn't want to go down a formal complaint route, but that was the next option. And then I'm dealt with, oh, well, actually, I'm really sorry, we can't give you an investigating officer, we don't know how long it will be. And can I also highlight that I've had no follow-up as a complainant to let me know what's happening. Okay. So again, it's what the board and the trust think might be happening isn't actually the reality of people who are out there. So you know, it just becomes a wider frustration then when actually all you want is the right care for your loved one. You've got all these other challenges that you're having to face one by one. And actually all you want is the right care. So
we have got a member of our customer relations team here today, so I would suggest that we introduce you to them so that you can.
I
think you need to be given an answer to how long you might expect, as was being discussed here in the board today. So we can make that happen.
Yeah, because it is interesting, you know, there are processes in place, but the trust is unable to adhere to its own processes. So what is the purpose of the processes?
I think we could talk about this very quickly, but I think we've been open about the fact that we have inherited some processes as part of becoming the lead provider for Section 117, as opposed to that's where some of the kind of enlightenment for us around needing to do more around this has really come from. And yet, coming on the complaint side, there is an absolute expectation, as we've been told today, that there is contact with people to let them know there's a delay.
Right, well, there's a delay.
And if that hasn't happened,
I just don't know how long it is.
Right, okay.
So yeah, thank you.
Sheila, thank you, for your questions. We really welcome it, and I hold the invitation from both Rashid and Vanessa to, to come and get involved and, you've shared your experience here, but just being involved in terms of, where we're wanting to take this forward. This is a new terrain for us in terms of being the lead collaborative, where this is actually going to be, as high already on the agenda. You may not see it that way for yourself. But we do definitely appreciate you coming in, and you heard what I said earlier. It isn't just platitudes. We are actually, going to be acting upon all of the experiences that we hear from different people who share with us and move things forward. It might not move as fast as you like, but it's definitely moving forward. So thank you again for your question. I appreciate it. So I don't have any other business. That actually does conclude today's meeting. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for attending.
Do you question?
No, thank you. No, yeah. Should we just say anything before we come back to ask you?
To make sure we noticed you were back.
Let's open and close it. So in terms of the formal public board meeting is now closed, so those of you who are not board members, if you can ask you to exit and go to Sheila, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's